The Freeman Legacy. Amara Wilson stepped off the train in Riverbrook, her delicate hat tilted just so, her gloves pristine despite 3 weeks of travel. She had saved every dollar, endured stares and silence, clung to the letters that promised a new beginning. Letters from Harold Pierce, owner of a general store, a 45-year-old widower, a man who had written of loneliness, of longing, of love. But as he saw her for the first time, Harold's face drained of color like a man who had seen a ghost. "This isn't going to work," he stammered, unable to meet her gaze. "You didn't mention that you were black." Amara finished the sentence he couldn't say, the ache in her chest spreading like ice. Around them, station workers and passengers slowed their steps, drawn to the quiet spectacle. "In your letters, you wrote so well," Harold said, fumbling with a wilting bouquet. You imagined someone who looked like you," Amara replied, voice steady despite the burn of humiliation. "But you never asked, and I never thought to warn you. I have a reputation here," he said weakly. "My business, the community," he offered crumpled bills. "You can stay somewhere nearby until you figure things out. I'm sure you understand." Before Amara could reply, a deep voice cut through the air. "Is that your solution, Pierce? Throw money at the problem and hope it disappears." A tall man stepped from the crowd. His sun-browned face and weathered clothes suggested a life of hard work, but his posture carried the weight of wealth and authority. "Alexander Maxwell," he said, turning to Amara. "I own the estate just outside town. I'd be honored to offer you lodging until you decide your next steps." Harold turned pale. "Maxwell, you can't. What will people say?" "They'll say what they always do and still sell me their crops every season," Alexander replied coolly. "Let them talk." Amara hesitated, eyeing this stranger who spoke with power and offered kindness. But kindness always had its price. "I don't owe you anything," she said quietly. "Nor do I expect anything," Alexander replied. "But no woman should be stranded for the color of her skin." She accepted. The Maxwell estate, what Alexander modestly called a property, turned out to be a grand Victorian mansion with sprawling land, purebred horses, and quiet elegance. Mrs. Foster, the housekeeper, showed Amara to the blue room. "Best view of the garden," she said, and not a flicker of judgment crossed her face. Over dinner, Alexander explained his past, son of a northern banker and an abolitionist teacher. Wealthy enough to be tolerated in Riverbrook, principled enough to be an outsider. "And you, Miss Wilson?" Amara sipped her tea. "I taught literature and history in Boston, but after my school closed, I needed to begin again." She didn't mention the hidden documents in her trunk, land deeds signed in 1866, passed down by her grandfather, a butler who had been more than a servant, a man named Joseph Freeman, that I in the estate's vast library. Amara pored over local records and dusty volumes. Her reason for coming to Riverbrook had shifted. She wasn't just seeking refuge now. She was uncovering truth. Rumors and revelations news of the black woman living at the Maxwell estate spread like wildfire. Merchants' wives, church elders, and the curious found excuses to call on Alexander. Amara stayed gracious, observant, and careful. 1 week later, Harold Pierce arrived. He stammered about concerns and propriety. "She's no longer a guest," Alexander interrupted. "Miss Wilson is now my librarian." a position she's more than qualified for. Harold paled. You can't be serious. Quite. Behind that title, Amara worked quietly, piecing together the story Riverbrook had tried to bury. The land Harold Pierce stood on, the property of many founding families, had once belonged to Joseph Freeman, until violence drove him out. 2 weeks later, the town hall overflowed with anxious citizens. Harold Pierce led the charge. She's trying to ruin us. Maxwell is protecting her. Then the doors opened. Amara entered in navy silk, head held high, briefcase in hand. I come not as a guest, she said, but as the legal representative of Joseph Freeman, to present a deed signed by the governor in 1866, granting my great-grandfather ownership of most of Riverbrook, including your store, Mr. Pierce. The judge confirmed the document's authenticity. Pierce shouted, "A forgery!" Amara calmly laid out supporting evidence. Maps, letters, testimonies. And yet I offer not to take what's mine, she concluded, but to share it, to build a foundation that benefits the entire community. Education, housing, a future built on truth. A new legacy within months. Riverbrook began to transform. The Freeman Foundation funded scholarships and rebuilt schools. Harold's store became the town's first public library. He left town disgraced, selling his assets for pennies. You could have destroyed him, Alexander said, walking with Amara through the newly opened cultural garden. Revenge lasts a day, she replied. Justice lasts generations. Amara's legal approach inspired similar investigations in other towns. She spoke at universities, not as a victim, but as a strategist and visionary. Eventually, she and Alexander married quietly. The estate became Freeman Maxwell House, a symbol of restoration, not retribution, like a TA celebration dinner. Judge Thornton raised a glass to the woman who proved that history can be rewritten, not with anger, but with truth and grace. Full circle on a quiet evening, Amara watched the lights of Riverbrook from her porch. You know what's ironic? She said to Alexander. Harold rejected me because of what I looked like. In the end, that rejection built everything he never could. And everything he feared, Alexander added. Your strength, your legacy. Together, they looked out on a town transformed, not by conquest, but by courage. The plaque in the town square reads, in honor of Joseph Freeman, whose land was taken and whose legacy was restored. Thanks to the granddaughter who stood in truth and the community that chose to grow.